Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. We got some breaking news on the broadcast of UFC Fight Night Kansas City, and that is that a fight was added to UFC 288, Movsar Evloev versus Bryce Mitchell, and this is going to be my reaction and early prediction for this fight. And also, Dana White hinted at the Kansas City post-fight presser of a much bigger fight being added to UFC 288 as a co-main event. He didn't specify what it was, but I believe I know what fight that will be, and we'll talk about that towards the end of the video. And also, if that fight becomes official later today or tomorrow, I will make a dedicated video on that fight. So if you're watching this in the future, make sure you check the description for a link to another video. I'll put it down there if any other news breaks about UFC 288. And also, guys, do me a favor, if you enjoy these types of videos, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We are so close to 10,000 subscribers. I would greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel. So my reaction to this news, Movsar Evloev, Bryce Mitchell, I love this fight. I absolutely love this fight. And UFC 288 really needed it because the co-main event, Charles Oliveira versus Beneil Dariush, was just recently canceled. Charles Oliveira pulled out with an injury. And let's be honest, that was the best fight on the card. That was the people's main event. I mean, Charles Oliveira is must watch. Beneil Dariush already deserves a title shot, but now he's fighting a former champion in Charles Oliveira to cement his #1 contender status. And, that one really hurt. When that got canceled, that really hurt. That really cut deep. And then you had the fact UFC 288 is now looking abysmal. It was looking horrible. And Bryce Mitchell was supposed to fight Jonathan Pearce on this card. Jonathan Pearce pulled out with an injury. And I just feel like this card was going down a hole where it's like, oh, is this card going to be canceled? Because you can't sell pay-per-views at all. And again, I don't make any money off the pay-per-view sales, okay? But I'm just saying that from the UFC standpoint, you can't sell pay-per-views with Aljamain Sterling versus Henry Cejudo as the only interesting fight on the card. That's just not going to work. If you have a main event like that, like I absolutely love the main event, but if you have a main event like that, you have to stack the card behind it. And especially when we're getting spoiled with UFC 287 and UFC 285, I just felt like UFC 288 was really looking like a turd, especially you lose that co-main event, and then you lose Bryce Mitchell versus Jonathan Pearce as well. The card was going to be atrocious. It was going to be horrible. And luckily for the UFC, and luckily for us fans, because honestly, I don't want to watch a crap UFC pay-per-view card anyway, we are getting Movsar Evloev versus Bryce Mitchell. Movsar steps in and saves the day. And this is a fight that kind of has some history to it. You go back to last November, we were supposed to get Movsar Evloev versus Bryce Mitchell as a fight night main event. Movsar pulled out with an injury, and what happened was Ilia Topuria said, I'll fight Bryce Mitchell, but I need another month to be ready for the fight. So they moved Bryce Mitchell to UFC 282 against Ilia Topuria, and we saw what happened there. Bryce Mitchell just got absolutely ragdolled and finished by Ilia Topuria in the second round via arm triangle. And that's where I have a bit of a gripe about this fight. I'm not going to sit here and complain too much because I do love this matchup, and we're going to get into who I think is going to win here in a second. But my problem with this fight is it was so much better 6 months ago. 6 months ago, you had 15-0 Bryce Mitchell versus 16-0 Movsar Evloev. You had two surging featherweight contenders who were undefeated, who looked better than ever. And now what you have is, 6 months later, you have Bryce Mitchell who just lost and got dominated against Ilia Topuria. And going into that fight, I told everyone, like, Ilia Topuria is not a striker. He's a grappler. His grappling is his best weapon in MMA. And Bryce Mitchell got dominated by Ilia Topuria. He got dominated in the striking, he got dominated in the grappling, and he got finished via submission. And now you have an opportunity at UFC 288 where he's supposed to fight Jonathan Pearce, which is a much more manageable opponent, and to get back on the horse, get back on a winning streak. And now, instead of fighting Jonathan Pearce, he's fighting Movsar Evloev, which is a very tough test for Bryce Mitchell, and on short notice. And as a general rule, I hate short notice fights because it's always like you have an asterisk next to the fight, no matter what happens. If Bryce Mitchell loses his fight, he's going to say, look, I took Movsar Evloev, a totally different stylistic matchup on short notice. And if Movsar loses, he's like, look, I stepped in on 3 weeks' notice. So there's always a bit of an asterisk next to these short notice fights. And there's always built-in excuses for both fighters that kind of delegitimizes whatever win they have, no matter who wins this fight. And you'll have fans saying, look, oh, he stepped in on short notice. This was a short notice fight. And you just build that narrative. And I just hate that narrative in general. but it's better than the alternative, this not being on UFC 288. And this is a phenomenal fight because you have Bryce Mitchell, who up until the Ilia Topuria loss, who I believe Ilia Topuria is a future title contender, if not a future champion, looked like a world beater. I mean, dude, he was ragdolling Edson Barboza, and, he was using his grappling to set up the striking. He even dropped Edson Barboza on the feet, which is words that I never thought I would say. Outside of that, he hasn't fought the best competition. Andre Fili, Charles Rosa, Matt Sales, which he got a twister against. And I was actually there live for that fight card, which was insanity. But you kind of have the same situation with Movsar Evloev. Outside of Dan Ige, he hasn't fought the best competition. We're talking Hakeem Dawodu, Nick Lentz, Mike Grundy. Not the best, competition in general. And the Nick Lentz, win was a split decision win. And I know people are going to bring that up. That should have been a unanimous decision win. It was a 30-27 for Movsar Evloev. For some reason, a judge gave the fight to Nick Lentz, which would have been a brutal robbery. But nonetheless, Movsar's undefeated. He beat Dan Ige in his last fight, which was in June of last year, which I believe is a quality win. I still believe Dan Ige is a top 10 UFC fighter at this point. I don't know if he's ranked. I don't think he's ranked. He's ranked number 13, so he's not in the top 10, but he's in the top 15. I believe Dan Ige beat Josh Emmett. I think it was a year ago or a year and a half ago. I think it was maybe UFC 269, if I'm remembering correctly. I might not be. But nonetheless, Josh Emmett's still sitting at number 5. Josh Emmett just fought for an interim featherweight title. I still believe Dan Ige is very good. Dan Ige just went out there against Damon Jackson in his hairline and showed how good he is. And I get Damon Jackson's not all that good, but Damon Jackson's a decent fighter, and Dan Ige looked levels above him in their fight, and he finished him. And Movsar went out there and brutally 30-27 Dan Ige. Quality win to keep, his undefeated record intact. And now he's taking on Bryce Mitchell, who's on the downslope in a way. He just lost to Ilia Topuria. Where's his confidence at? He made all types of excuses afterwards. I had the flu and this and that. And I don't know where Bryce Mitchell's head's at because I don't necessarily trust Bryce Mitchell and his fight IQ. We know I can't trust a guy, in terms of his fight IQ when he believes the earth is flat. I just can't do that. And I just think he's coming off a loss. He got dominated. He's making excuses. He hasn't fought the best competition himself. His best win's Edson Barboza, which I believe is a quality win. But Barboza has been exposed by pace and pressure wrestlers in the past. And I just think you look at this fight, Bryce Mitchell needs to weaponize his pace. He needs to use his wrestling to win this fight. And Movsar Evloev is a very good grappler wrestler himself. And he's very young and ever improving. And I think if Bryce Mitchell can't go out there and really bully you in the grappling, he's going to have a hard, chance to win this fight. And I think Movsar Evloev is ever improving. His hands are very good. And I think if Bryce Mitchell wants to win this fight, I think he's going to have to expose the gas tank of Movsar Evloev. Because Evloev has looked to get tired in the third round of previous fights. And Bryce Mitchell, we know where his gas tank is. So Bryce Mitchell definitely has the gas tank advantage, the stamina advantage. And Bryce Mitchell is essentially going to have to do Merab Dvalishvili type of fight game plan to beat Movsar Evloev. But when I look at Movsar Evloev, I just think he's too well-rounded, too good in the striking, too good in the grappling, too good in the submission defense. And for me, for an early prediction, I have to go Movsar Evloev. I could even see Movsar Evloev finishing him with the hands. I think his hands have looked good fight after fight. They're improving. The Dan Ige fight, he was lighting Dan Ige up on the feet, who Dan Ige is a very good striker himself and has KO power. And I think Evloev has decent striking. I think he has okay knockout power. And I really think Movsar Evloev could finish Bryce Mitchell on the feet. But also, if I had to really nail down an early prediction, I'm probably going Movsar Evloev via decision. And I could see maybe Bryce Mitchell starting to come on late in that third round. But I just think you take all the factors into account for this fight. I just don't think stylistically this is a good matchup for Bryce Mitchell. It makes sense in terms of the rankings. Evloev's number 10, Bryce Mitchell's number 11. They were supposed to fight each other before. They, game planned for each other before and had training camps for each other before. But Bryce Mitchell just lost the fight, planning to fight Jonathan Pearce to see who was the bigger NASCAR fan. And now he's fighting Movsar Evloev instead. I think Movsar Evloev gets this done. And I just think Bryce Mitchell, is going to lose this fight. And I just think it's going to be the beginning of the end for Bryce Mitchell because the featherweight division is stacked. You have a bunch of up-and-coming contenders. And Bryce Mitchell's too worried about flat earth documentaries and, complaining about every conspiracy under the sun. And I just don't think he has the IQ to really improve and formulate a game plan to beat some of these elite of elite at featherweight. You know, if Bryce Mitchell can't come in and just push the pace on you and just grapple you, he's not going to be able to win the fight. So I don't really see him ever really propelling himself into that top 10. If he does, he'll barely break the top 10, and he's going to lose to majority of the people above him. You know, it's unfortunate because I like Bryce Mitchell. I know it may seem like I don't like him, but he's a character. He's interesting. I do like Bryce Mitchell. I just don't think he gets it done against Movsar Evloev. Now, as far as the other fight the UFC may be adding to UFC 288, they pressed him at the post-fight presser and they asked him, look, are you working on something for this? Are we getting a new co-main event? Because Charles Oliveira, Beneil Dariush is off. And he said, yes, we're working on it. We were actually working on it tonight. And then they asked him specifically about Gilbert Burns. And Gilbert Burns has been tweeting recently. He wants to fight on May 6th, whatever. And Dana said, yeah, he's been blowing me up. You know, we'll probably see him. You know, he kind of said probably. But who knows what Dana? He lies all the time. He says, you know, he misdirects all the time. But I believe the fight that makes most sense. Gilbert Burns recently came out and said, look, give me a title shot or cut me. And I said, cut him then. If that's your demands, cut him then. But in this situation, I think, you know, Gilbert Burns was kind of being overdramatic, and he's seen people, you know, Colby Covington get away with demands like this before. But now he's willing to fight at UFC 288, and Gilbert Burns has always been a guy that's willing to take short notice fights. And I'm trying to think, okay, well, who would be willing to fight him on short notice? Well, guess who also is tweeting out? Belal Muhammad. And you have a tricky situation in the welterweight division right now where Leon Edwards is most likely fighting Colby Covington in his next fight, but Leon Edwards isn't fighting towards, you know, till the fall at best. You know, he said, I'm not fighting in the summer, which was rumored for a while, pay-per-view in the UK over the summer. And so what I think will happen is I believe we will get Belal Muhammad versus Gilbert Burns as the UFC 288 co-main event. And I think the way the UFC is going to entice them, they're going to say, look, whoever wins this fight is the #1 contender after Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington. And I think that's how they're going to kind of make this card significantly better. Belal Muhammad arguably already deserves a title shot more than Colby Covington and should be getting the title shot over Colby Covington. But Colby Covington, you know, stepped in, you know, to weigh in at UFC 288 or 286 to be the backup. And I think maybe Usman was close to pulling out, is at least my theory. I made a whole video about it the other day. I'll link it down in the description. And I think the UFC is just, you know, dedicated and committed to giving Colby Covington that title shot, even though Leon Edwards doesn't want to do it. And I think Colby ultimately gets a title shot. But I believe the UFC is kind of solving multiple problems here because Belal Muhammad, Gilbert Burns are both screaming from the rooftops that they deserve title shots. And the only other deserving contender is Shavkat Rakhmonov. And Shavkat Rakhmonov, he's not going to turn down any fight. He's 17-0 with 17 stoppages, wins. He's undefeated. Shavkat just beat Jeff Neal. Most people thought he was maybe one fight away from a potential title shot anyway. So Shavkat, you know, who knows who he's going to end up fighting. You know, we might see some of these fights play out. We just saw Shavkat fight in mid-March anyway. So Shavkat's going to sit out for a while. You do, you know, Gilbert Burns versus Belal Muhammad. They can be the #1 contender, you know, for the winner of Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington. And it makes UFC 288 more, you know, or makes it significantly better. I was going to say more better for a second there, but it makes it significantly better. And you guarantee the person in the co-main event a title shot, which helps promote the event even more. This fight's got significant stakes on the line, and basically the winner of that fight will then just have to wait it out towards early 2024 to then fight the winner of Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington. I ultimately think that's what's going to happen. Maybe it's going to be something different. As soon as the news breaks, I will make a dedicated video on what is the new co-main event for UFC 288. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you turn on notifications. And thank you so much for watching. I will see you guys in the next video.